So welcome, and thank you for your patience, and welcome to the value. What is the value of your idea? Now, today is going to be a lot of material to cover, and I'm going to do a little review of what we covered in the last webinar. And for the purposes of the people who didn't attend the last webinar, there's going to be some review. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Dream Exchange, and I'm also going to give you some really valuable tips this time. But part two, we're going to go through mechanics. I am Joe Cecala. I'm the founder and the CEO of the Dream Exchange. Okay, so my personal background, I'm a lawyer, I'm a CPA. I've been at this game of raising capital for small businesses for 30 years, large businesses alike. So I have a lot of experience working with the entrepreneur, working with the seasoned company owner who may not be as big a company as he wants to be or dreams of. So all of what you're going to hear today is geared towards preparing you not only to raise capital in the private sector, but we're educating the public so that you can be prepared when the Dream Exchange finally launches to participate in the Dream Exchange. So my background, I was the lawyer who represented the founders of the first really electronic stock exchange called Archipelago nearly 25 years ago. So I have a bit of a background in understanding how capital markets work and how investors and how small companies interact with one another. And what we're doing is designing a complete new way to go about doing this so that it can be done using financial technology, the internet, and really get more people participating successfully in capital raising. And that's really where the Dream Exchange comes in. Just a quick overview of the Dream Exchange. It's been a long-standing idea of mine. So we will be the first Black-owned stock exchange in the history of America. And what we're doing is we're building that. We're in architecture phase right now. And what's most important to us is the small business. So our brand, we're very much concentrated on the entrepreneurs. And it's our intention to create a lot of listings around you, the entrepreneur, or even if you are a seasoned older company and you want to expand and you want to use the American public capital markets to expand, that's what we're all about. And that's a very, very brief overview. There's a lot more information on the Dream Exchange itself that you can get. And at the end of this, there'll be some options for how you can participate, and one of them will be to get more information on the Dream Exchange itself. So the last webinar, we were talking about valuation and what are the mechanics of business valuation. And we went through, in very brief form, what are the different types of valuation? How is the investor looking at your business? And a lot of times they're looking at these 5 standard technologies, and there's several more: capitalization of earnings, discounted future earnings, price to earnings multiple, price to revenue multiple. These are the types that a mechanical financial person will use to look at the revenue and earnings of your business to try to come up with a value. Now, what's important about the value? Well, that value that you're trying to create with your investor partner is really going to determine how much of that company that you're going to own someday. So the higher the value, obviously, the stronger your position is in the future in terms of being able to work with your own team, remain autonomous, own your company, and really, even if at some point you turn it over to someone and they take it from here, as the old expression goes, at least you'll be rewarded handsomely for what you have created. So how do you get the maximum value for your business, whether you're revenue producing and profitable or whether you're before revenue? Now, that's the concentration of today's discussion is, what do you do before you're having revenue? What do you do before you're having earnings? Now, a very common, in fact, the most common way that a valuation is done is on a price to earnings multiple. What that means is a willing investor is actually buying your profitability in the future. So the value is your earnings times some multiple. And that multiple has a particular formula for the way it's going to be calculated. So, for example, you could reduce this to a formula that says value of your company equals earnings times M, right? So that you have to be able to put some numbers in there, right? And that's where hopefully we'll get into some mechanics today. But that value is calculated in a very precise way, the value of the multiple, what they call a valuation multiple. And we went over this last time. So it's usually based on risk. So in a standard way that investors look at small companies, they do what's called a risk-based calculation. The greater the perceived risk, the lower the offering price, because they want a higher reward, right? So the greater the risk, the higher the reward is a common expression, right? Now, there's a certain amount of falsity to that in small companies. And we're going to show you this today a little bit, where it's an introduction today, and the mechanics will be in part 2. But today, for sake of looking at risk-based calculation, you could say that someone who perceives the risk of an investment to be higher demands a higher reward. So say he demands a 50% return on his funds. Well, a 50% return on funds means that he would be only willing to pay you 2 times your earnings. So it's a much lower price. So if you earn $1 million, your company then could be said to be valued at $2 million. Whereas if he perceives that the risk is lower and he demands less of a rate of return, he's demanding the rate of return, a floor, if you will. He sees that he's almost certain to make 20%. If you're buying a treasury bond, you pay, the return is very, very low. So the fact is that there's no risk in a treasury bond, or no perceived risk anyway. So the value of it comes up to exactly what the investor pays. He pays 100% of what his investment is, but he gets very little back. So if you were a lower rate of return, say 20%, he might be willing to pay a multiple of 5 times your earnings. So in this situation, those multiples of earnings, those are return expectations, and they drive that high risk, and it's in competition with all the other comparable businesses in your industry. And if you're perceived as a very high risk industry, well, naturally, you're going to have to produce a tremendous rate of return. And as you're at lower risk, there'll be a lower rate of return. Now, in this situation, you have something to do. You've got to overcome that perception. There's a perception that that investor has, which is that you are somehow going to lose his money. In fact, after he invests the money, his common question is, or before he invests it, how do I get my money back? So there's only really 2 ways. You can be wildly profitable and you can pay him a lot of dividends from your earnings, or the value of the organization will increase and you'll sell it for a much higher price. So that perception of risk means that he's looking at, how will your business grow? What will the business look like in the future? And how much can it be sold for? And if it's a stock investment, how much can he sell his stock for over the price he paid for it? And that perception of risk is very, very important for you to understand when addressing your investor, or as an investor, getting the risk right. Because when you look at the word risk in and of itself, there's a vagueness to calculation of what is a risk. So, for example, a venture capital investor, he's always looking that the value of the investment will increase 10 times. You have to persuade him that the value of your company is going to go up at least 10 times to get his interest, or multiples of 10 times. And the more he perceives that you can't pull it off, you're not going to be able to do it, or your company isn't going to grow, the more that risk-based calculation becomes important to him. So what can you do really to overcome the perception is, what can you do to increase your valuation? So how do you increase valuation? Well, these are from last time again, 3 starting points. What is the value of the company today? That's the first question you have to ask yourself. And sometimes that inherent value, if you have no revenue or you have no profitability, means you have to look at other alternatives to putting a value on your company than strictly a mathematical earnings model. The other thing is, what is he thinking about his return? Is he a venture capitalist? Is he someone that needs 10 times his investment to justify making the investment? Or is he someone that is a bit more conservative and he'd be willing to see your business double in size in 5 years. If a business doubles in size in 5 years, that's a 15%. So it's very important to communicate with you how you're communicating your risk. And last, cut an optimal expansion target so that your exit net value can actually produce liquidity. How do you persuade the investor that he's not only going to get his money back, but he's also going to get the promised rate of return, right? So what do you have to do to communicate? Now, this is a little bit about where we're going to start transitioning from last webinar to this new webinar, which is how to tell your investor the plan and get their agreement. Now, an agreement is an equilibrium. When things agree, they're balanced. But what you're really looking for in the earlier stages is on the value of your idea. It's not so much that you're making a lot of money. It's not so much that you have wild amounts of revenue or wild amounts of earnings. The value of your idea is what really is going to drive that investor into making his investment and making a fair exchange with you for the value of your company. And this is a very important paragraph because it outlines 4 important concepts. So the need to correctly, strategically plan for expansion is increased as only the best companies will successfully raise funds and sell. So if you have a proven track record of being unsuccessful, you've got to, you've got to start from there and move forward to a convincing argument that you're going to make it this time. On the other hand, if you make milestones and you have good progress, you can actually communicate that. But the progress is a little less important than the idea. This is today's webinar. Today's webinar is actually show you something that is very unique and very, very different than any other way of looking at your small company. And that is to look at it as a valuable idea in and of itself, which if you're strategically planning to get a value for your idea, number one, you have to correctly estimate the effort to start that idea in motion. And that means energy and resources. Energy means money. It means the exact amount of time and effort that you yourself will commit and your staff will commit. And resources being money and human capital and property. That's all those things, all those tools needed to put it there and start it. Because if it hasn't started in motion, then the investor is looking at it saying, my investment is going to go towards starting this whole idea into motion. The second thing is to increase its momentum. How will it grow? How will it go faster to produce more customers faster? And then the third thing is to nourish it. In other words, once you're established, once you're there and you're really not living on the possibility of a new investor giving you funds, what you really have to do is make sure that you continue to put things there that expand your company. And lastly, recognize when it will decline. And this one is probably the most important one because nearly every new company has a period of decline. In fact, in our formulas, which are in the part 2 of this webinar, you'll actually see that you should be honest about the fact that after you get the investors' funds, you're going to spend all the money. You're going to spend it to expand your company. And after you've spent it, you may not have all the revenue. You may not have all the customers. So there's some period of time of uncertainty when that investment is still in its growth stage. And during that time, you have to make sure you carefully plan so that you don't become obsolete. Because if you prevent obsolescence of your product and it keeps expanding in its scope, then you'll be a successful entrepreneur and your investor will have been a successful investor. So your business idea is of greatest importance in this conversation. So your business idea is the total future value of your company, regardless of your present earnings. This is what's unique about today. This is a very unique, not just in today's webinar, but in today's world. The future value of your company, regardless of how much it earns, is what's most important to the investing public. So I've given 4 examples here. There's probably dozens of companies that have enormous value. Palo Alto Networks, they're traded on the New York Stock Exchange. They're a great company. They're a software company. They have a value of about $29 billion. as of the last quarter. Their trailing income for 4 quarters is negative $268 million. So how is it possible that a large company like this lost $268 million, yet they still have a value of $29 billion? Twitter, anybody hear of Twitter? Great company. It has a $36.5 billion value. Its 4-quarter net income is they lost $1.2 billion over the last 4 quarters. How is that possible that they have such a valuable company, yet they're losing money in bushel baskets? Tesla Motors, my favorite one is Tesla, because they have a $392 billion value today. Fourth quarter, the last 4-quarter net income as of March was negative $144 million. Now they posted their first income ever in July. I believe they were up perhaps a couple $100 million. But in the entire history of Tesla Motors, they had never made a penny. Yet somehow Tesla Motors is the world's largest automobile manufacturer today. And the same thing with Uber. Uber with $66 billion, with posting a fairly sizable loss of 6.96 is it 6.96 billion? I can't see the rest of the slide because my face is blocking it out. In any case, these are 4 good examples of very large companies, and they're all very valuable, and they've all lost money. But what is the common denominator for these companies? What's common about them? Well, the simple equation is they have valuable ideas. The value of their ideas supersedes their top line revenue, and it supersedes their earnings. So what you have to do is begin to look at your company in a completely different way, even if you're in a garage right now, even if you're at the very infancy of your Apple computer waiting to be born. And it's not just technology companies. If you make things, if you're manufacturing, because we've actually run this methodology through a pilot, and the company we worked on, they made a very boring product. It was a heavily manufactured product with lots of steel and aluminum and copper and lots of products that went into it that were not high tech. So this methodology I'm going to introduce you to is very important for you to see that those customary viewpoints that are really the ways that everyone looks at a company needs to shift. So when you go into your first conversations with an investor, these are common. There's more than these that are ways that an investor will use to make you feel like your business is somewhat worthless. First one, my favorite one, that they're silly ideas. So who wants to rent someone else's house? That's a great question, right? Yet Airbnb is an enormous business because someone's idea was, I'll bet you that this is a viable way to get people who are not using a home, not wanting to rent it out, to displace hotel rooms. They're a major player in the industry now when it comes to travel. So Airbnb is now a household word. It was a silly idea at first. Who wants to rent someone else's house? Sounded like that's just odd. Why would anyone be comfortable doing that? Well, you have to be able to think big enough to see that Airbnb was a future multi-billion-dollar company. The second one is competition. Investors love to say, well, who's your competition? How will you survive all that competition? For example, online shopping. So really, you think you're going to compete with Amazon. And actually, when Amazon started, Amazon was in competition with the entire retail market. Their competition looked, but yet Amazon somehow overtook retail shopping. Now, they did it in a niche at first. They had a nice niche. They were selling books. They were selling online books. On the other hand, you could get a hard copy delivered to you. Still can today. I'm a frequent customer of Amazon because I like to hold the book in my hands. But that competitive market still was superseded by a brand new idea, differentiating itself from the entire retail industry. Another one is changing existing customer behavior. My favorite one here is Uber. Why can't you just call a cab, a cell phone? Why wouldn't you just call a taxi, right? Taxis have been around forever. They actually changed the way consumers use cars, use taxi services. Ride sharing was born, and other companies were born from Uber. But that idea that you would be willing to use your own personal vehicle to go pick up a complete stranger didn't exist many years ago. So changing existing consumer behavior is another way to look at your idea, and don't let someone tell you that you can't change behavior if your idea is good enough. Another one is founders aren't the top experts. So in other words, if you aren't a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, you shouldn't actually think of how you're going to establish your chemistry company. Well, that's just false. The example I'm using there is, so there's a guy who built a payment processing service and he thinks he's going to travel to Mars. I mean, it almost sounds like a joke. However, look at SpaceX. SpaceX and Tesla Motors were born out of a man who really was the success in payment processing. So how can you move through that objection? Simply, again, your idea has to supersede the revenue model, the mechanics. You've got to really be able to have your idea down. And then the last one, my favorite one, is, well, there's no revenue and there's no income. You can't see how any of this is going to make money. And clearly, the favorite example of that is a free software where college kids can share photos. Sounds like a really small business idea, except that Facebook overtook the entire social media market. They made the social media market into the social media market by virtue of coming up with a better idea. And the idea was to give it away because there were all kinds of other ways to make money using it. Now, I'm giving you these examples to give you pause. I want you to think. I want our favored customers are ones who are not just inventing things, because an invention is something that you have to patent or you have to come up with some particular mechanics. There are very few mechanics in many of these very large companies. And that's what excites me about doing what we're doing at the Dream Exchange, because you have to do a little dreaming here. You have to think of your idea and think of your company at the end of its road in this big way where everyone will be buying it. We no longer take taxis. They've actually displaced the word taxi. Take an Uber. Uber's become synonymous with taxi. It's no longer even just a technology, it's a brand. It's Kleenex and tissue paper. So you want to look at how you can expand your idea. And that's where the value is, even before you make any money. And we're interested in you, and we're interested in helping you work on that, because this is where the greatest ideas in our society will be born. And I'm going to get to that in a little while, but we are interested in making sure that we protect the greatest ideas throughout our society. So here is our methodology. Now, these are formulas. And when I say a theorem, it means that internally we try to do some mathematical models to see where the company's idea is going, to help that early business, or even if, like I said, a mature business that wants to expand. They have a different idea. I have many, many, many examples. Literally, the sheet metal manufacturer who's making plates that fit underneath trucks came up with an idea for a new metal alloy so he could use sheet metal for medical trays. So he wanted to make surgical trays and surgical instruments because he was really good at what he did, but he had this other idea, completely different one. So our methodology fits mathematically, and I'm not going to get to the math just yet, but I want you to realize that this is the theory behind the math. So number one is the long-term market value of a company's shares. That means what you own, what your investor owns, and each individual shareholder. It's going to reflect the degree to which its products can improve the conditions of mankind. And when I say conditions, I don't just mean that you've invented a new way to purify water, which was one of our clients. That's a fantastic idea. But our conditions are improved through communication devices. We have iPhones today. We have wireless technology. Wireless communications change the way we live our lives. And these are the ideas of our future, and they're faster today, they're bigger, and they're much more easy to work on than ever before, because more investors are interested in this type of expanded idea. And if you look at how what you're doing someday can expand across the globe, think that big. The value of your company isn't going to get a lot of resistance if you can really tell the story well. What is that based on? What is this conditions of mankind based on? Well, it's our desire to survive well. And when we're desiring that, we search for truthful solutions to problems that face our conditions. It's why we're no longer in caves. The human condition has evolved tremendously. And when I say that, that's a bit extreme, but it doesn't have to be such an extreme notion to look at how correct this is. 120 years ago, in 1900, there were virtually no automobiles. The internal combustion engine wasn't being used. People drove around in horse and buggy if they were lucky enough to have a horse. In 120 years, we now are flying to other planets, literally. We've landed on the moon. So what has happened in the last 120 years? Well, we've been changing the conditions of how we survive. We have climate-controlled homes. We have climate-controlled cars. We have food technologies that are extraordinary, where people are able to eat. And I'll get into the nutritional value of agriculture in this presentation. So the fact is that we're always overcoming the challenges to our survival as long as the solution is true and we discard the ones that don't work. That's why leeches are no longer used as medical technology. Bloodletting is not a valid way to treat an illness. So as we find truthful solutions, we stick with them. So you have to look at what your solution is and how truthful it is and how much it can actually expand the conditions of other people. And it doesn't matter if you are distributing art and promotional materials on the internet. Those are valuable products that change the way we live. Salesforce changed the way we live. It changed how salespeople do their daily activities. Microsoft Office changed the way we live. Those are just computer programmers. Those are just people who developed technology because they kept thinking, how can I make someone's day a little bit better, a little bit easier? How can I make the workforce work better? So that's part two, looking at it through this methodology and actually writing down what you have to offer in these spaces. Now, the third thing here is that products and services that increase our ability to survive are worth more money, especially when they provide these global survival solutions. So I'm going to get into that in great detail in another slide, and I hope I'm still on time here because there's a lot of materials. And if I don't cover anything today, I'll make sure that in part two I pick it up because I'm going to go rather quickly. But products and services that increase our ability to survive are worth more money. They expand our life, and they're more valuable. So you have to ask yourself, number one, how well does my product help others survive? How well am I improving the lives of others? Why would anyone want to use this? Number one, in that context, not just because it's useful. Horse and buggies are completely useful products today. But how well does it help others by comparison to someone who came up with a motorized vehicle? And then the real question you have to ask yourself about the mechanics is, how much effort, that means that energy again, both money and people, energy and resources is needed to expand, to really put it there. Remember those 4 principles I gave you at the beginning. What do you need? How much money do you need? Are you asking yourself what the strategy is to use that money in a very precise way so that you can put your idea into motion? Remember those 4 original principles. So as you organize writing your business plans, as you organize what your investor presentations will look like, These are very important foundational theorems, okay? Now, even these foundational theorems have with them a principle, something that you have to believe in. It's a principled world, like what you stand for. And this is a principle within our group, that expansion is life. When things are contracting, that is tending towards death. So as things expand, and those things that are expanding that increase our survival because they're more creative solutions, well, they're going to make us all better off, and they're very valuable. They're worth a lot of money. So man survives best when free markets, and when I say free markets, I mean the American investing public, the public markets, they communicate acceptance of truthful solutions and ideas that forward our potential. How do they communicate their acceptance of the idea? They keep investing. The Tesla Motors idea, which was that we would have mass-produced electric cars, that's just an idea. It's been accepted as a truthful solution, and it's workable. And that truthful solution is actually improving our world. Regardless of whether you believe in climate change or global warming or what your potential political views are, use of electronic vehicles is cleaner. It's less pollutive. It's less difficult to get some of the energy needed to produce the electricity. That's clearly something that's going to be improved upon as we go. On the other hand, the idea that mass producing electric cars was merely a possibility is now a reality, because we have accepted, and there are billions of dollars invested in accepting this truthful solution that is forwarding survival across our planet. And number two is that the investing market accomplishes the principle through the exchange of money. They're buying a share in the future rewards to be earned from physical byproducts. So it's not merely that someone invested money in the design of a Tesla motor car, it's that that car actually has come into existence. And it's not a pilot, it's a workable solution to getting around using an electric car. So those byproducts that result from expanding these universally helpful ideas that increase our ability to survive on Earth become the most valuable products. And therefore, they get an exchange of money. Investors give them money consistently, even if they lose money for years. Tesla Motors has proven this. Many technology companies have proven it. There are biopharma companies that have proven it. There are agricultural companies that have proven it. The proof of this lays throughout our landscape. We're just pointing to it at the Dream Exchange and saying there isn't a principle of this survival creativity. It's why we have sustainability. It's why we have all of the products and things that we're doing today that we're trying to manufacture, because people want a better world. They want to survive. They don't want to make chemicals and dump them into the water, because eventually you're going to get in a lot of trouble doing that. You risk going out of business if you're not a big enough company that gets away with doing some things like that are clearly wrong. So that second part of this principle of survival creativity is to pay attention to the fact that if you have it, you'll continue to get investor support. And optimal survival on Earth must mirror physical laws. Look, we're on Earth. And as being a part of this planet, you can't ignore that things are valuable to the extent we can use them on our planet. The idea of nutritious food is just an idea until you grow it from the ground. Well, growing food from the ground involves physics. In fact, all of the ideas, including Facebook, involve a certain amount of mirror image to how the laws of physics work. Things that are valuable have force. They're powerful, right? We would consider them to be powerful. Well, when we look at this in our methodology, the principle of survival creativity has to be a mirror image of something that can be calculated. Now, this is not about money any longer. At this moment, before the money is there, before the largest companies that have not made any money or that are losing money hand over fist, they have recognized this principle. They've discovered truth that is increasing the human condition, our ability to live our lives in a different way. So physics has this law, it's the law of force. It's mass times acceleration equals force. So if you have something traveling very, very, very fast, the larger the object is, the more forceful it is. That's just physics. Well, there's a mirror image of that law in the value of your idea. It's a mirror image of how the laws of physics work. Survival value is equal to the human magnitude of your idea multiplied by, we're using the letter U. So it's a mere variable in an algebraic formula for the time being. So survival value equals human magnitude times U. Human magnitude equals the frequency of it being used. How often can this be used, and by how many people? One could argue that Facebook is used by hundreds of millions of people. And I think a key indicator of Facebook is how often were people going into Facebook? Well, they were using it all day. So the human magnitude of Facebook was enormous, enormous. People who produce products that are agricultural, nutritional products, clean air products, sales products that are used throughout our society to help people sell products and goods, because the human magnitude is, it's geometric. How many people sell something every day when they get up to operate their business? So if you can help on that communication line, you're in great shape. In fact, if you are the communication line, you're even better shape. Zoom, Skype, Webinar Jam, all of these businesses that put communication lines out that expand the ability to communicate, well, how many human beings are using it? How frequently? And what is that survival potential? Not necessarily in its current form, but what is the potential survival? So when one looks at Zoom, if you had the idea for Zoom 15 years ago, that potential is huge. That potential is applying wireless technologies to the medium of being able to do what I'm doing right now, see my face, and be able to communicate with you in a video conference is an enormously survival potential. Doctors see patients on Zoom today. Congress has met on Zoom. These are things that in our society we're now taking for granted. But what is it doing? It's forwarding the aims of our ability not only to survive, and when I'm using the word survive, there's an ever so slight variation of this, which is improving life itself, living a better life, because the greatest population of people want to live better lives. That's the whole point, right? When you buy something, even if it's buying a movie, it's the entertainment value. It's why they rate the movies. It's when you shop for a car. It's when you shop for groceries. It's when you buy anything, you're looking through a lens of whether or not that will increase your ability to survive. That survival potential idea is something you have to pay careful attention to. Now, we have a little bit of a secret sauce within our company that is useful to help discuss your survival potential or idea. How is this helpful to other people? And it's born out of some very, very interesting experience. Now, this is a very, very theoretical way of looking at it, because when we say survival value, I'm not saying that you should sit down and calculate that you're going to sell 2 cents per unit to the entire earth times the survival potential, which looks like it's 100% survival potential. That's going to give you a mathematical dollar value. If you don't apply this formula, however, in the first instance and say, wow, it's very valuable, you're actually going to find yourself off track. This is where we get products that are actually quite destructive. And those products that are destructive have lots of trouble. They're controversial. The product that is suffering today is petroleum. It has been a long product that has been very well entrenched. It's been useful for all kinds of things, but the survival potential of it is seemingly shifting. There are antiquated ideas about the uses of oil. Now, I'm not an advocate for or against oil or the petroleum industry, but they have to recognize that these potentialities for their products are something that they could miss. Remember what we said earlier? Preventing it from going to be obsolete. So no one would say, I'm going to go out and make $1 billion. I'm going to open the world's greatest horse and buggy shop. That idea just would not have the frequency of use or the population willing to use it on Earth today. On the other hand, it's not a bad idea to be the best person who makes a particular product that's sold for people to use horse and buggies. If you want to go to downtown Chicago and you want to go out to dinner with your significant other, well, there are beautiful carriages and horses that drive people around. There is a market. It just does not going to expand to the same degree as some other products. And if you're in that industry, if you're making horses, making buggies and selling horse and carriage rides, you want to pay attention to this. What are they selling it for? Well, they're selling it for the romance of the evening because people want that out of their lives. That's the whole point of having the buggy, because it's no longer a mode of transportation to get one to market. So I want you to pay careful attention to this particular slide, and we'll be doing this more in the future to educate yourself as a small business owner as to how to rethink about your business. And this is where this was born. I'm going to give you a slide on exactly how this was a bit tested internally in our company. Here's the example in action. Now, this is a slide of a shelf in a grocery store. And what you see there is the price, $4.99 on sale. And this is the organic egg shelf in my grocery store. And I began testing this, and we're going on 10 years of this. 10 years ago, my wife bought organic eggs, and they were extremely expensive. And I asked her, she wasn't belligerent with me, why she bought the organic eggs, because they were twice as much money. And she had the simplest of all answers. She said, they're better for our family. Now, I don't know if she actually did any research. I don't know if there are studies out there that say when you eat an organic egg, you get more nutrition. The point is that the survival value of that idea, that there was a product that your family would eat that did not contain harmful byproducts, was sold. So in the last 10 years, I've experimented on this and in many other ways with many of our clients from our merger acquisition firm to see how viable this idea that if the product helps someone and the perceived value is that they're increasing survival, that they're increasing a quality of their human condition, that it's more valuable. We've done this test in many, many companies, but this is a really simple one. And the simplicity of it was, every time I've gone to the grocery store to pick something up, I go over to the egg section and I ask someone who's buying organic eggs by survey, and I've done this literally several hundred times, why are you buying those eggs? And uniformly, the answer is, well, they're better for you. They're better than the other eggs. Now, here is an interesting idea that I'm going to tell you about the mechanics of this. Remember, this is the egg shelf in my grocery store at $4.99 on sale for organic eggs. And here's the plain vanilla egg shelf right next to it. They're $3.19. And they're all still there. In other words, people are buying the more valuable product because they perceive it to be more valuable. Now, you could argue they're just buying a more expensive product because who knows, maybe they're going home and they're eating a bag of chemicals in potato chips that are the worst ones for you. You could argue that. On the other hand, what this is a microeconomic example for you as a business owner, because the perceived increase in survival and the improvement of life in this example is now commonplace. No one would really argue that an organic egg is better for you. And I don't really even know whether it's true that they're making any difference in your health. But what I've said this entire time is that it's a perceived value of how you are helping other people to survive. And here's what's interesting. they will pay more money for it. They not only will pay more money for your product, but an investor will see that long term, if you're able to do it, accomplish it, well, then those ideas, as they're set in motion, as they are nourished, as they are expanded, and as you make sure they don't become obsolete, they long term have more value. And that's what's really important here about understanding this discussion. All right. So having said that, this is an introduction to this concept and what our technology is. Now I'm giving you a one-slider. Now the entirety of the second part of this webinar coming up is going to go through the mechanics of the equilibrium price. I've showed this in the first webinar. I'm showing it now because there's a preparation phase for how you go about looking for an investor who aligns with you and what they believe about your purposes and your products. There's also the deployment phase after you've closed that investor, and usually what happens is you use the funds, and then the funds that are used are sure they can survive. You do have to make sales. You do have to make profit. Where are you doing it? Out how we can about why we will answer that's going to keep you expanding for a very, very long time. This is what we want to help you with. This is the whole purpose of the Dream Exchange, is to see the public markets accept companies like that, even if they're $5, $10, or $15 million in value or in that need for capital. So as I get to this, what we have is some products that, just going to give you a very, very brief overview so I can keep it under the 1 hour and still answer some questions. If you go to our website, we have an introductory company analysis. It's a very, very, very easy to use, 100% automated product, and it's customized for business, and it will give you all of the information about it. It's going to give you a report on where the industry you is heading. And we're also going to analyze a number of different areas of your business based upon the data you provide and score on your kind of where you are in terms of ready to talk to investors, ready to raise capital, ready to expand. There's a score, like in this example here, there's a score of 59. Don't be offended by your score. It's just a beginning place for you to look at. So I urge you to go and look at the intro company analysis. It's an amazing tool for you to begin this process, to start out with your company, looking at how can I analyze my company using a bit of the methodology and ways that the Dream Exchange looks at the world.